Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for August 2nd, 2017. On today's episode, we'll be answering a mailbag question about superhero origin stories. In the news, we'll be talking about A Nightmare Before Christmas sequel, but it's not what you think, James Bond 25 rumors, a secret Star Trek series that might be a Wrath of Khan reboot, MTV rebooting Total Request Live, and a lot of behind-the-scenes troubles on The Dark Tower. In our feature presentation, we'll be talking about how Game of Thrones is moving much, much faster now, and is that a good or bad thing? I'm Peter Sciretta, and with me today are...
Jacob Hall.
Brad Oman, a.k.a. Ethan Anderton.
And Ben Pearson.
Let's jump right into the mailbag, guys. Kyle from North Carolina asks, it seems like one of the things that people enjoy most about Spider-Man Homecoming is the handling of the origin story. Do you think that more superhero franchises or superhero/franchise movies will opt to skip the origin story? Or do you think this would be a good idea? What do you think, Brad?
I mean, personally, I hope so. Mostly because a lot of the superheroes that are getting treated like this nowadays are origins that we already know. And even if they aren't, I feel like just throwing us into the mix and having us figure out who they are and what their powers are and not knowing how they get them is much more interesting than it is seeing maybe 45 minutes of them figuring out who they are and how to use their powers. It's basically like watching a 45-minute training montage. It's, that's why training montages are only a couple minutes, because it speeds things up and it gets us to the point where we're ready to see our main character, prepared and fully ready to do whatever they were preparing to do in the first place. And so I feel like, if we get a new Green Lantern, I hope we don't get an origin story. Or if they happen to do another Blade movie, I don't need to, hear about what happened with Blade or anything like that. I would love to be just thrown into the mix and figure out who the character is as a fully formed hero, rather than having to figure out all this stuff from the beginning.
But Brad, what if I like training montages?
Then go watch them on YouTube.
No, I don't think that there's a problem with superhero origin stories. I think the origin stories are oftentimes the best part. Like, seeing Superman discover his powers in that original Richard Donner Superman, him crashing to Earth and all that stuff. Is great fun. I think the problem comes when you have 3 Spider-Man reboots within, 15 years. And the public is well aware of the origin story. We don't need a retelling. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you just hit on it right there, and that's something that Brad was sort of mentioning too. Is like a lot of the future movies, the more superhero movies there are, the more likely it is that reboots will not have to rely on origin stories going forward because they already exist. But I sort of agree with you, Peter. I think especially for characters that might be more niche or whatever, I think general audiences probably need to have that shown to them on the screen before they can move on into the action as a whole, just to understand, what are the rules that this character is playing by. You have to sort of lay the groundwork a little bit. And I think Spider-Man Homecoming has been the beneficiary of, 15 years of Spider-Man movies that came before it. So, I think in future instances with characters that we're already familiar with, absolutely skip the origin story. But anything that audiences maybe haven't seen before, it's probably a good idea just to sort of lay that track and let everybody know what playing field we're all operating on.
I think also part of the trouble is once you're doing the superhero origin story, you also have to do the villain origin story. And it's just too much to fit into one movie most times. And the villain usually gets the shaft. Jacob, do you think what they did with Spider-Man Homecoming, with skipping the origin story completely, is something that could be done in other franchise movies?
I think so. I think we've already seen it a little bit in Marvel with Guardians of the Galaxy, which throws you in these characters and actually doesn't really explain where they come from until the sequel, even with Star-Lord learning more about his father.
That's a very good point.
People getting more comfortable with these weird characters, but at the same time, my barometer for all things superhero is my mother. She calls me every weekend after she sees the latest Marvel movie, and she always tells me what's confusing, what she loved. She complains about how Thor's hair is too long and greasy. And then she tells me about how she loved Doctor Strange because she did not know the character, she did not know his story, and she was fascinated to see his journey because it's nothing that she had seen before. So yeah, I think with the more popular superheroes, dive right in. We don't need to see Batman's parents get shot again. But when it comes to Doctor Strange or Captain Marvel in a few years, I think audiences are going to dig seeing these pieces of the puzzle that they did not know get placed there for them.
For sure. And I think that pretty much answers the question in the mailbag. Let's move on to the news. First up in the news, A Nightmare Before Christmas sequel is coming almost 2.5 decades after the original hit theaters. But it's not what it sounds like. It's actually a comic book sequel, and it's coming in the form of a manga from Tokyopop, who has gotten the rights. Tokyopop has done a bunch of adaptations of all the like live action Disney animated retellings, and they even did a manga of Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. This sequel is going to be called Zero's Journey. It's going to come out in spring 2018, and it basically is going to be released as issues and then eventually collected in a trade and pocket-sized manga. That basically Zero gets lost in the land of Nightmare Before Christmas. What is that? Christmas Town? Yeah, Christmas Town. So Jack Skellington's dog gets lost and he has to go, find him. It doesn't sound like something that could be the source material for a potential sequel, but you never know. I know Disney Imagineering is doing a lot of work with Marvel and these comic book adaptations of their rides, and they're trying to get something going and potentially getting movies made out of these, using the comic books as a starting off point, and that's been done many times before. But this doesn't sound like one of them. I'm sure Disney would want a Nightmare Before Christmas sequel. What do you guys think? Ben, could we see a Nightmare Before Christmas sequel come from this?
I guess. To me, the original Nightmare Before Christmas was just one of those things that I didn't connect with as much as some of my peers did. It always just struck me as like something for the Hot Topic kids, and I never really found my way into that story. I couldn't connect with it on anything other than an aesthetic level. So I've never really given a second thought to a sequel coming out. But yeah, anything's possible.
I see an unpopular opinion column brewing right now.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
Let's move on to James Bond. James Bond 25 is happening. They've announced that. We don't know much more. We think Daniel Craig is returning. What do we know about this, Jacob?
Well, the truth is we have a release date, which is in 2019. But that's all we really know. Because right now, you can go to /film.com, and then we started almost a running joke between me and HT, the writer who wrote this article for us, how we're officially on Bond Watch Day 1, because every single time there's a new Bond movie every few years, the UK tabloids start spewing out rumors constantly to the point where picking through it all is a nightmare. So look for Bond Watch. But today in Bond Watch, we have a title, Shatterhand. We have a Dubrovnik, Croatia filming location, which is where they filmed King's Landing from Game of Thrones and where they filmed key scenes for Star Wars The Last Jedi. We have the rumor that's based on one of Raymond Benson's James Bond novels, which would make this the first James Bond movie that's not an original concept or based on Ian Fleming novel. And the truth is, I'd say about 90% of this is probably BS, because this is a Mirror, it's a UK tabloid, and this is just the way James Bond cycle works. We get a couple months of BS, followed by a very big, very fancy press conference, followed by filming. So right now we can pick and choose, but right now we know a release date, we know a lot of rumors, and the fun is going to be seeing how much of this is true and how much of it's totally fake.
Next up in the news, Nicholas Meyer's secret Star Trek series may be a Wrath of Khan reboot. Ben, what do we know about this? And do we need another Wrath of Khan reboot?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Nicholas Meyer, who directed Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, back in June, he told Trek Movie that he was working on a secret Star Trek project that had nothing to do with the upcoming Star Trek Discovery TV series, but he said that he couldn't discuss it at the time. I think just a couple days ago, an outlet called Geek Exchange claimed that this secret project was a miniseries about Khan, who was the villain of The Wrath of Khan. And basically, this outlet called Inverse emailed Nicholas Meyer to ask him about this, and his response was, "I cannot possibly comment," with, cannot spelled with, like, Khan is inside the word. So, yeah, exactly. Some whatever. Some clever pun game there. But yeah, so the theory behind this, he hasn't confirmed it yet. He says he can't comment. But the theory is that the miniseries that he's working on, if it indeed does focus on Khan, would take place in between when the character was exiled on Ceti Alpha 5 after the events of the original series episode Space Seed, which introduced him, and it would take place before the events of The Wrath of Khan, which came out in 1982. So it would sort of, cover that period of his exile and show us what Khan, this legendary Star Trek villain, was up to during that time. I don't know, Peter, to answer your question, I don't know if we need another Khan origin story or reboot or anything like that. I feel like this is one of those characters that the Star Trek filmmakers and TV producers have become obsessed with, maybe to their own detriment. I feel like the universe that they have to operate in, the sandbox, is pretty wide open. So to keep coming back to the same characters over and over again seems maybe a little reductive, maybe a little short-sighted. I feel like there's plenty of room to expand and come up with new creations, new characters. But then again, name brand recognition is the name of the game in Hollywood right now. So, I would not be surprised if this turns out to be a true thing.
I'm just surprised that they're developing 2 Star Trek series simultaneously, because that just doesn't sound like it's going to happen. But anyways, moving on. MTV is rebooting Total Request Live, which sounds ridiculous to me, because do kids these days even know what a request show is? Like, we live in a day of on demand. You can, go on YouTube and pull up anything. How will they even react to Total Request Live? How and why, Brad? Tell us about this.
Yeah, I mean, MTV is not really at their strongest point right now. They don't really know what they're doing as far as their programming is concerned, and bringing TRL back is kind of part of this new reinvention that they're starting to see, because for a while they were dabbling with a bunch of scripted shows. That's how we got Teen Wolf, that's how we got Scream. But now they're starting to shift gears and get back towards live programming, which is going to include some new late night stuff, and also going back to reality shows and unscripted content, which is kind of where MTV had their bread and butter in the 90s, when we had shows like The Real World and Road Rules and all those kinds of shows. So bringing back Total Request Live is not only a step back towards that, but it's also a move towards getting the music back in MTV, which they've always seemed to have struggled with since the late 90s, early 2000s. As for whether or not people care, I guess we'll find out. You're absolutely right when it comes to how sort of the culture has changed as far as how we consume our entertainment, because Total Request Live was popular during a time when fast internet was not as readily available as it is now. We didn't have YouTube being full of music videos where we could watch them whenever we wanted to. We didn't have phones that were full of apps and social media. And so, Total Request Live was a show that I often watched when I would come home from high school, and it was one of the only ways you could see some of the more popular music videos at a time when you could expect it, because all of the fan bases came out in full support by, voting online or calling or, texting to vote to see their favorite music videos in the top 10. And I'm not sure that that's something that people are really interested anymore, when you can watch those music videos wherever and whenever you want to. They are talking about how the new version of the show will incorporate new kinds of content into things like Snapchat and Instagram and that kind of thing. But I just don't know if this is the kind of show that can be retooled or reinvented in an effective way, based on how we consume entertainment today.
And that just sounds like throwing out some, hip buzzwords in there. It doesn't sound like they have a concept there. And one of the things that always bugged me about TRL, and I used to watch it, is they didn't always show the video that was requested. They'll show like a clip from it, just like they were doing, a top 10 countdown of the day. So I'm wondering what this is going to be. If they're looking for ideas, why don't they bring back Singled Out and they could have Chris Hardwick host it? I mean,
I'm pretty sure Chris Hardwick doesn't want to return to Singled Out.
No, but I'm just joking that he's still, a host of things, and yeah. So let's move on from that. The Dark Tower, it looks to be a disaster. It hasn't even come out yet, but we're already seeing articles from Variety and other sources talking about the behind-the-scenes troubles. Jacob, I know you even have some inside information into what is going on here. What do we know about what is going on behind the scenes of the Dark Tower?
Well, a little bit of backstory. I interviewed director Nikolai Arcel at Comic-Con, and I asked him about the film's 95-minute running time, and he assured me in the interview, the portion of which you can read on slashfilm.com right now, that it was all part of the plan. They wanted to make a lean, mean first entry. The screenplay was short. It was all part of the intention because the first book was the shortest of King's original books. And once I published that, I was contacted by somebody associated with the production who said, that's all BS, right? And I said, I'm listening. And so when this Variety story came out, it essentially confirms what I've been hearing, which is that the behind-the-scenes battles on this thing have been pretty nasty. From an original cut that was much longer, my source says close to 3 hours. I'm gonna try to figure out more details. That included all kinds of world building and details and references to deeper Dark Tower lore. But apparently, and this is a Variety story as well, this terrified the studio, it terrified test audiences who were baffled by it, and everybody got personally involved. And Variety reports $6 million in reshoots to change certain key scenes and make certain things clearer and establish more backstory. But my source, and hopefully I'll be able to share more with you in the future, told me they also completely reshot the ending, and it claims that it is a disaster for fans of the book. So, like I said, I don't want to say too much because we have irons in the fire, and I would like to be able to share more and tell you guys what was changed, what was shot originally. We'll find out, but the truth of the fact is that I've heard from Variety, from my personal source, and from another journalist who has his own separate source, that this has been a troubled production. That the reason why the trailer was so late was because they were still figuring out what this movie was and reshooting it, and that nobody is especially happy with how things went from any angle.
Going from 3 hours, supposedly, to 95 minutes, that's like cutting the film in half. It makes me wonder if we'll ever get to see that longer version of the movie, maybe, 10 years down the line on an extended edition, I was going to say Blu-ray, but we probably won't have Blu-ray. Hologram disc. Yeah. Hologram download. And that does it for the news. We're going to leave Brad here. Brad, where can we find more of your work?
You can find me at slashfilm.com or on Twitter at Ethan_Anderton, and check out my own podcast called Go Flix Yourself, FLIX, on iTunes and other podcasting platforms if you're feeling like some fun.
Thanks for joining us, Brad. And now in our feature presentation, Game of Thrones is moving much faster now, but is that a good thing? There's an article on slashfilm.com. It's a conversation between both of you, Ben and Jacob. So let's start at the beginning. Ben, why is Game of Thrones going much faster at a much faster pace now, more than ever?
So this is the 7th season. This is the penultimate season. Things have been happening. The pieces have been laid out deliberately over the past 6 seasons already, and now everything is finally happening. All of the pieces are coming together, and the players are finally sort of reaching their end game status. Right, things are getting to the point where the end is in sight. The end of the tunnel is right there. So the show has just been, at least in the 7th season so far, jumping around from location to location, and characters have been traveling from over vast distances in a much quicker, more condensed pace than they had in previous seasons. And I expressed some sort of disorientation and was talking a little bit about how jarring I found that. And Jacob thought it would be a good idea to sort of hash out our feelings on this, because I think he is a little bit more tolerant of the show's pacing at this stage. So that's what we did in this article. Jacob, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think I am more forgiving of it than you are, Ben. In the article, I compare Game of Thrones to a Dungeons and Dragons game, where in the final run up to the final dungeon, the dungeon master is fudging the dice rolls a little bit to ensure that his players have a satisfying end game, and just sort of breaking the rules just a bit to make sure that the moments that people want are happening. The example you used in our article, Ben, was Bran suddenly arriving at Winterfell. Oh, by the way, spoilers. So if you're listening, spoilers. Is Bran suddenly arriving at Winterfell after making his debut at the Wall this season, and nobody having sent a raven ahead to say, "Hey, the heir to Winterfell is alive. You guys should know this." And you argue this breaks the show's internal logic for a show that's so built on world building, or the details have mattered so much in every season. This doesn't make sense. And yes, I agree with you as somebody who's devoured all of the books and devoured all these supplemental materials about the history of this world. Yes, you are correct. But Sansa Stark being able to see your brother for the first time since episode 2, and that moment for me, I feel like that was Benioff and Weiss, the showrunners, nudging the D20 a little bit to say, you know what, let's crit on this one. Let's pull on the heartstrings instead of have the logical answer. And I'm more forgiving of it because I want those moments. I feel like the show is paying off moments that I want as opposed to playing by its own rules. And I understand the frustrations, but I think I'm willing to forgive it more than you are.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think ultimately I'll be able to forgive the show's lack of internal logic as long as it can continue to produce emotionally resonant moments like the meeting between the Stark siblings, or what I presume to be a big upcoming revelation of Jon's true lineage. So I think as long as the show hits those moments really hard without necessarily distracting, and having that little thing in the back of my head going, I don't know about that raven. I don't know how this person got there so quickly. The show did such a good job in the early years of, paying close attention to the world of George R.R. Martin and what he did, in the pages of those novels. But I do understand that the novels are different than the show by necessity. Martin has all of the room in the world really to craft these stories and all the time to get into the nitty gritty details. And I understand that Benioff and Weiss have a whole different set of circumstances and restrictions on their end that doesn't make it a practical thing for them to be able to address every single one of these little concerns. So as long as the show ends up being emotionally resonant, then I think I'll be able to forgive the characters' suddenly gained abilities to seemingly teleport all around Westeros with no apparent consequences.
But teleportation, here's the thing about teleportation, is that if teleportation means the Lannister army getting across the entire continent to Highgarden, so they can corner Olenna Tyrell, then have that scene between Jaime and Olenna play out the way it did. If suspending my disbelief for that teleporting army, it means Olenna Tyrell's final scene on Game of Thrones, which may be among the best scenes the show has ever done in terms of writing, acting, and payoff. Screw it, teleport everyone, get them where they need to be, because I want that for the next 10 episodes. I want that as we descend into non-stop climax. Keep bringing those moments. That's all I want.
I hear you.
Well, that does it for this discussion. You can read the whole discussion on slashfilm.com. You guys have a whole article with you guys discussing the pros and cons of the increased pace of the show. And it sounds like the pace is going to be changing in season 8 or season 7.5, whatever they want to call it. It sounds like we're going to be getting, feature length episodes. So I wonder what that is going to mean, and I'm sure you guys can get together for another conversation on Slash Film Daily at that time. Where can we find more of your work online, Ben?
You can find me at slashfilm.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Ben Pears.
And Jacob, where can we find you?
Every single day at slashfilm.com and on Twitter, where I am at Jacob S. Hall.
And you can find me on Twitter at slashfilm. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday on slashfilm.com. If you are enjoying this podcast, please go to iTunes, review us, rate us, and we will see you tomorrow.